I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw the sailboat. It was one of those sleek, expensive vessels that wealthy tourists rent to impress their mistresses or business partners, all gleaming white fiberglass and polished chrome catching the afternoon sun. But this one sat at an unnatural angle against the rocks near Capo Zafferano, its hull torn open like paper, waves pushing it rhythmically against the cliff face with a sound that made me wince. My dive group had just finished exploring the underwater caves that made this stretch of Sicilian coastline famous. 8 tourists from Germany and the Netherlands floated on the surface, checking their waterproof cameras and chattering about the schools of damselfish they'd photographed. I was counting heads, making sure everyone had surfaced safely, when Paolo, my boat captain, grabbed my shoulder and pointed. "Sarah, there's someone in the water." At first, I thought it was a piece of debris from the wrecked sailboat. Then I saw the dark fabric moving differently than the waves would carry it, and my training kicked in before my brain fully processed what I was seeing. I kicked hard toward the floating figure, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was face down, arms spread wide, drifting with the current that would carry him past the rocks and out toward open water. I reached him in 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes, flipping him over with practiced efficiency. His face was pale beneath a tan that spoke of Mediterranean heritage, lips slightly blue, seawater running from his nose and mouth. Mid to late 30s, I guessed, with the kind of bone structure that fashion photographers probably loved, and the beginnings of gray at his temples. I checked for breathing. Nothing. Checked for a pulse at his neck. There, faint, irregular, but present. "Paolo, get the boat here now," I screamed, already positioning myself to tow him back. The man was solid muscle beneath his soaked linen shirt, making it harder than usual to keep his head above water as I side-stroked toward my dive boat. The tourists had gone silent, their vacation excitement replaced by the universal discomfort of watching someone else's emergency. Paolo brought the boat alongside us within minutes. Together, we hauled the unconscious man aboard, laying him on the deck. Water poured from his mouth as we turned him on his side. Then he coughed, a violent, retching sound that sent more seawater across the deck, and his eyes flew open. They were remarkable eyes, even in distress. Dark brown, almost black, with an intensity that suggested he was accustomed to reading people quickly and accurately. Those eyes fixed on me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Not gratitude, not fear, but something closer to calculation, as if he were immediately assessing whether I was a threat or an asset. "You're safe," I said in English, then repeated it in my mediocre Italian. "Sei al sicuro." He coughed again, his whole body shaking with the effort. When he spoke, his English was perfect, touched with a British accent that suggested expensive education. My boat, the steering failed, the rudder, it was cut. That statement should have confused me. Instead, it sent ice down my spine. Not broke or malfunctioned, but cut. That was a specific word choice, implying deliberate action rather than mechanical failure. "Let's get you to shore first," I said, wrapping a towel around his shoulders. "Then we can worry about what happened to your boat." But he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength for someone who'd just nearly drowned. His grip wasn't painful, but it was insistent. "You don't understand. Someone did this deliberately. Someone wanted me to." He trailed off, seeming to realize how paranoid he sounded to a stranger who'd just saved his life. I glanced at Paolo, who was already radiating the particular discomfort Sicilians feel when conversations venture too close to certain topics. In my 3 months teaching diving in Sicily, I'd learned that locals had finely tuned instincts about when to ask questions and when to suddenly develop selective hearing. "What's your name?" I asked the man, gently removing his hand from my wrist. "Marcus," he said after a brief hesitation. "Marcus Santoro." The name meant nothing to me, but I saw Paolo's expression change. a subtle tightening around his eyes that confirmed my growing suspicion that I'd just pulled someone important out of the water. Not celebrity important, something else. I'm Sarah Mitchell. I run these dive tours. Let's get you back to Cefalù. Get you checked out by a doctor. No doctors. His voice was firm despite his waterlogged state. No police, please. Now I really should have asked more questions, should have insisted on proper medical care and official reports, but something about the desperate sincerity in his eyes, and the way Paolo was studiously avoiding my gaze, made me nod instead. The ride back to harbor was tense. My tourists clustered at the far end of the boat, whispering in German and Dutch. Marcus sat wrapped in towels, watching the shoreline approach with an expression that cycled between relief and what I could only describe as cold fury. I found myself studying him when he wasn't looking. The way his jaw clenched and released, the controlled breathing he used to calm himself, the expensive watch still on his wrist that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. When we reached the marina, he stood with only a slight wobble. I need to make some calls. Where can I reach you if I need to thank you properly? I pulled out one of my waterproof business cards, something I'd had made when I started freelancing as a dive instructor. I'm here through the end of the season, another 3 weeks. He studied the card like it contained encrypted messages. Sarah Mitchell, Portland, Oregon. You're a long way from home. So are you, I'm guessing, I said. That accent didn't come from Sicily. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. My father sent me to school in England. He thought it would give me polish. It mostly gave me a preference for tea over espresso, which disappointed him greatly. It was such a normal thing to say, so unexpectedly human after the tension of the rescue, that I laughed. The sound seemed to surprise both of us. Marcus pocketed my card. Thank you, Sarah Mitchell from Portland. You saved my life today. That creates a debt I take very seriously. There was something formal, almost ritualistic, about the way he said it. Like he was making a vow rather than expressing gratitude. Before I could respond, a taxi pulled up at the marina entrance. Coincidentally, perfect timing. Or maybe not coincidental at all. Will you be all right? I asked. I will be now, he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, do me a favor. Don't mention this to anyone. Not the details. Just say you pulled a tourist from the water. Nothing more. Why? He met my eyes directly. Because if the people who sabotaged my boat learn that I survived, and that someone witnessed the aftermath, they might come looking for that witness. And I would prefer not to have your life endangered, because you did the decent thing and saved mine. My mouth went dry. Marcus, what exactly did I just get involved in? Nothing, if we're both lucky and discreet. He climbed into the taxi, then leaned back toward the window. Go about your normal life, Sarah. Teach your tourists to dive, eat good food, enjoy Sicily, and please, forget you ever met me. The taxi pulled away, leaving me standing on the dock with salt drying on my skin and a growing sense that forgetting Marcus Santoro was going to be significantly harder than he suggested. Paolo appeared at my elbow. Sarah, that man... Don't, I interrupted. I don't want to know. Whatever you're about to tell me, I'm happier not knowing. But Paolo shook his head. You should know. That way you can be careful. Marcus Santoro is not a man who has accidents. If someone cut his rudder, it was an assassination attempt. And if they find out you pulled him from the water, they might wonder what he told you while he was vulnerable. He told me nothing, just that his steering failed. It doesn't matter what he actually told you. It matters what they think he might have told you. I stared at my boat captain, this 60-year-old Sicilian who'd been nothing but kind and professional for 3 months, and saw genuine fear in his eyes. What are you saying, Paolo? I'm saying go back to your apartment. Pack your bags. Get on a plane to Portland tonight. Don't wait for the end of the season. Just go. But I didn't go. Maybe it was stubbornness, or the fact that I'd already bought my return ticket for 3 weeks out and couldn't afford to change it. Maybe it was the naive American assumption that movie plot dangers didn't happen to dive instructors who paid their taxes and avoided trouble. Or maybe, if I'm being honest with myself, it was because Marcus Santoro's dark eyes had held something that made me want to understand what kind of life required someone to sail alone to think, whose enemies would sabotage a boat in broad daylight, who spoke of debts and discretion like they were sacred concepts. I went home to my small rented apartment in Cefalu's Old Town. I showered the salt from my hair and changed into clean clothes. I made pasta with the tomatoes and basil from my landlady's garden. I tried to read a book on my terrace overlooking the Mediterranean, but found myself rereading the same paragraph 5 times. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of dark water and sinking boats, of expensive watches glinting in the deep, of eyes that assessed and calculated even while death approached. I had no idea that 24 hours later, everything Paolo had warned me about would come true in the form of 6 black SUVs and men who looked at me like I was a problem requiring a permanent solution. The next morning started like any other. I woke at dawn to the sound of fishing boats leaving the harbor, their engines a familiar rumble that had become my alarm clock. I made strong coffee on my small stove, toasted yesterday's bread, and ate breakfast on my terrace while reading the local news on my phone. There was a small article about a sailboat accident near Capo Zafferano. Tourist likely swept out to sea, search suspended, presumed drowned. No mention of a rescue. No mention of Marcus Santoro by name. I wondered if he'd made those calls he mentioned. Wondered if he was safe wherever he'd gone. My first tour of the day was an easy one. A family from Milan with 2 teenagers who'd done some diving before. We spent the morning exploring a shallow reef, pointing out octopi hiding in crevices and moray eels that looked menacing, but generally left humans alone. The teenagers were thrilled, the parents relaxed, and I felt myself sliding back into the comfortable rhythm of my work. It was easy to convince myself that yesterday had been an aberration, a strange moment that would fade into an anecdote I'd tell at dinner parties years from now. One time in Sicily, I pulled this intense guy out of the water, and he acted like he was in a mob movie. People would laugh, pour more wine, and the conversation would move on. I had no idea I was being watched. The second tour was canceled. The clients had food poisoning from bad shellfish, according to Paolo, which was unfortunately common enough that I didn't think much about it. I spent the afternoon doing equipment maintenance, checking regulators and testing tank pressures. Boring but necessary work that let my mind wander. I kept thinking about what Marcus had said. That creates a debt I take very seriously. There had been weight to those words, a formality that felt imported from another era. Like he was operating under rules I didn't understand, playing a game where honor and obligation carried actual consequences. Around 4 p.m, I decided to walk to the grocery store. My refrigerator was depressingly empty, and I wanted to make a proper dinner. Cefalu's narrow streets were crowded with tourists, everyone moving slowly in the heat, ducking into shops for gelato or limoncello. I loved this time of day. The golden light painting the medieval buildings, the smell of baking bread from corner bakeries, the old men playing cards in the shade. I didn't notice the black SUV parked across from my building. I bought tomatoes, fresh mozzarella, basil, a bottle of wine. The woman at the market knew me by now, always trying to practice her English while I mangled Italian in return. We laughed about my pronunciation, and she threw in some extra peaches because I was too skinny, troppo magra. When I walked back to my apartment building, arms full of groceries, I still didn't see them. Not until I reached my door and heard the engines. 6 black SUVs, appearing from different directions like they'd been coordinated, pulling up in front of my building simultaneously. The narrow street suddenly felt impossibly small. Tourists scattered, sensing trouble with that animal instinct humans have for danger. My landlady's curtains twitched on the first floor, then quickly closed. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles. Not running, but moving with purpose. I counted at least 12, maybe more. And then, from the lead SUV, Marcus Santoro stepped out. He looked nothing like the waterlogged, desperate man I'd pulled from the Mediterranean 24 hours earlier. His shirt was crisp and expensive, his hair perfectly styled, his bearing radiating controlled authority. But his eyes, those dark, calculating eyes, held something that might have been regret as they fixed on me. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the distance between us. "I need you to remain very calm and come with me. You're not in trouble, but you are in danger, and I can explain everything once you're somewhere safe." The groceries slipped from my arms. Tomatoes rolled across the cobblestones. The wine bottle shattered, red liquid spreading like blood. "What is this?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "What's happening?" One of the suited men, older, with silver hair and an expression that suggested he'd seen and done terrible things, moved toward me. Marcus held up a hand, stopping him. "I told you to be discreet," Marcus said to the man, though his eyes never left me. "This looks like a kidnapping, Domenico." "It is a kidnapping," I said. "That's exactly what this looks like." "It's protective custody," Marcus replied. "There's a difference, though I understand it's difficult to appreciate that distinction from your current perspective." A window opened above us. Someone shouted in Italian, something about calling the police. One of the suited men looked up and said something back, quietly, calmly, and the window slammed shut immediately. "Sarah." Marcus took a step closer. "Yesterday when I told you to forget we met, I meant it. But someone took your photograph during the rescue. My people discovered it this morning. It's already circulating among certain interested parties, and they're trying to identify you." "Parties." I repeated the word like it might make more sense that way. "What parties?" "The people who sabotaged my boat. They think I might have told you something during the rescue. Something valuable enough to extract from you, one way or another." The street seemed to tilt. I grabbed the doorframe for support. "But you didn't tell me anything." "I know that. You know that. They don't know that. And by the time they discover you're genuinely ignorant of anything useful, you'd already be." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Irrecoverably compromised." "This is insane. This is absolutely insane. I'm an American citizen. I'll call my embassy. I'll..." "Do that, and you'll be dead within 48 hours, the silver-haired man, Domenico, said flatly. "The American embassy in Palermo cannot protect you from what's coming. They can file paperwork after they find your body, but that's not particularly helpful to you." My knees actually buckled. I caught myself against the wall, breathing hard, my mind racing through impossible options. Run? Where? Fight? Against 12 armed men? Scream? The windows were all closed now, everyone hiding, no one willing to get involved in whatever this was. Marcus crossed the remaining distance between us. Up close, I could see the tension in his jaw, the carefully controlled concern in his eyes. "I am genuinely sorry about this. But you saved my life yesterday, and I don't forget debts. Which means I'm not leaving you to the wolves who want to use you against me. So you have two choices. Come with me voluntarily, and let me protect you until this situation is resolved, or I have my men carry you to the car, which is unpleasant for everyone, but arrives at the same destination. Some choice." "More than most people get in similar circumstances," Domenico muttered. I looked from Marcus to the SUVs to the closed windows of my neighbors who wouldn't meet my eyes. Thought about Paolo's warning yesterday. If they find out you pulled him from the water, they might wonder what he told you. Thought about the small article in the news that morning, reporting Marcus Santoro as presumed dead. If his enemies thought he'd drowned, why were they still hunting for witnesses unless... "They don't know you survived," I said suddenly. "That's why the article said presumed drowned. You're letting them think you're dead." Marcus's expression flickered with something like approval. "Smart. Yes. Which gives me time to investigate who authorized my murder. But the photograph of you pulling me from the water complicates that strategy. It proves I survived long enough to be rescued, which means they'll assume I survived, period. And now they want to know what I might have said to the pretty American dive instructor who saved me. I'm not pretty. I'm sunburned and usually covered in salt water. That's not really the point right now." He was right, but focusing on irrelevant details was the only way my brain could process what was happening. Some part of me was still convinced this was an elaborate prank, that someone would yell surprise and we'd all laugh about the misunderstanding. But the weight of the pistol I could now see under Domenico's jacket suggested this was terribly, dangerously real. "If I go with you," I said slowly, "what happens? Where are we going? For how long?" "My family's estate outside Taormina. It's secure, defensible, and far enough from Cefalù that your sudden disappearance won't immediately connect to me. How long depends on how quickly I can identify and deal with the people who tried to kill me. Days, possibly weeks. And then? Then you go back to Portland, or wherever you want to go, with enough money to make up for the disruption to your life and a guarantee that no one will ever bother you about this again." It was surreal, negotiating the terms of my own kidnapping, protective custody, whatever, like it was a business arrangement. But something in Marcus's demeanor suggested he meant what he said, that his sense of obligation was genuine, even if his methods were terrifying. "Your apartment will be secured," he continued. "Your landlady will be compensated for any concerns. Paolo will be told you had a family emergency and returned to America. Your dive equipment will be packed and stored. From the outside world's perspective, you simply left early. No mysteries, no investigations. Except the mystery of what happened to me. You'll be alive to be mysterious. That's better than the alternative." I closed my eyes, trying to think through the panic. Every instinct screamed not to get in a car with strange men, no matter how expensive their suits or sincere their promises. But every practical bone in my body recognized that Marcus was right. I was trapped by something I didn't fully understand, and my options had narrowed to accepting his protection, or hoping that whoever wanted to hurt me would somehow miss their target. When I opened my eyes, Marcus was watching me with an expression that might have been sympathy. "I know this is unfair," he said quietly. "You did a good thing yesterday, and now you're paying a price for basic human decency. I hate that. But I can't change it, only mitigate it. Please, Sarah, let me keep you safe." Maybe it was the exhaustion in his voice. Maybe it was recognition that he seemed as frustrated by this situation as I was. Maybe it was just the total absence of better options. "Fine," I heard myself say. "But I want to pack a bag, and I want to call my sister and tell her I'm okay. Supervised packing. No phone call until we're secure." Domenico countered immediately, but Marcus shook his head. "Let her pack. Give her 15 minutes. No phone call yet, but I promise you'll be able to contact your family once we're at the estate. I'm not a monster, Domenico." "You're too soft," the older man grumbled, but he gestured two of the suited men to follow me inside. My hands shook as I unlocked my apartment door. The men stayed in the doorway, watching but not entering, which I appreciated even though the whole situation was absurd. I grabbed my suitcase and started throwing in clothes, toiletries, my laptop, chargers, anything that seemed essential for an indefinite stay in what I was mentally calling house arrest with a view. The drive to Taormina took nearly 3 hours along Sicily's coastal highway. I sat in the middle SUV, sandwiched between Marcus and Domenico, watching the Mediterranean flash past through tinted windows. The convoy moved smoothly, professionally, like this was routine for everyone except me. My heart gradually stopped hammering, replaced by a surreal numbness punctuated by moments of sharp clarity when I'd remember this was actually happening, and not some fever dream brought on by bad shellfish. Marcus spent most of the drive on his phone, speaking in rapid Italian that was far too fast and idiomatic for my basic language skills. I caught fragments, names I didn't recognize, terse questions. Occasionally, his voice dropping to something that sounded distinctly threatening. Beside him, Domenico worked on a laptop, his weathered fingers flying across the keyboard with surprising speed. "Can I ask questions?" I finally said, breaking the silence. Marcus lowered his phone. "Of course." "Who are you? Really?" He considered his response carefully. "My family has business interests in Sicily and throughout southern Italy. Some legitimate, some operating in gray areas. We provide services, maintain order in certain communities, and yes, occasionally enforce our own justice system when the legal one proves inadequate." "You're mafia." "That word carries a lot of Hollywood baggage," he said mildly. "But essentially, yes. My family has been part of Sicily's alternative governance structure for 5 generations. It was the calm way he said it that made it real. No dramatics, no glorification, just matter-of-fact explanation like he was describing the family accounting business. "And someone in your family tried to kill you. Someone close enough to sabotage my boat and know I'd be sailing alone yesterday afternoon. Which narrows the possibilities considerably, but still leaves multiple suspects. Family business can be complicated when succession and territory are involved." I stared at him. "You sound very calm about someone trying to murder you." A dark smile crossed his face. "I've had 24 hours to move past shock into the much more productive emotion of controlled fury. Right now, I'm gathering information, shoring up my resources, and determining exactly who betrayed me before I respond. Patience is essential in these situations." "Has this happened before?" "Attempts on my life, 3 times, though never this close to succeeding. The sea was actually clever. Harder to prove it wasn't an accident. And if you hadn't been there, I would have drowned or been swept out far enough that recovery would be unlikely. Whoever planned it understood that bodies raise questions while disappearances at sea can be written off as tragic accidents." The casual way he discussed his own murder attempts made my stomach turn. "This is insane. Normal people don't live like this." "Normal is a relative concept," Domenico interjected. "What's normal for a dive instructor in Oregon looks insane to a shepherd in Mongolia. What's normal for us looks insane to you. Doesn't make either perspective more valid." Marcus shot his companion a look that might have been amused. "Domenico fancies himself a philosopher." "Domenico has survived 40 years in this life by understanding that perspective is everything," the older man countered. "The girl's not wrong to be frightened, but fear without understanding is just panic. Better she knows what she's dealing with." We fell silent again. I watched the landscape change as we climbed into the hills. Olive groves giving way to vineyards, small villages perched on ridges like they'd grown from the stone itself. The late afternoon sun painted everything gold and amber, beautiful enough that I almost forgot I was being kidnapped by criminals who discussed murder attempts like business setbacks. The Santoro estate appeared suddenly as we rounded a curve. A sprawling villa complex surrounded by high walls, cypress trees standing like sentries along the perimeter. The architecture was classic Sicilian. Honey-colored stone, terracotta roof tiles, arched windows that probably dated back centuries. Beautiful and fortress-like simultaneously. The gates opened smoothly as our convoy approached. We drove through manicured gardens toward the main house, passing fountains and statuary that suggested generations of wealth. Staff members appeared on the front steps, an older woman in an apron, several younger men in casual but clearly expensive clothes, a thin man in glasses carrying a tablet like it was a sacred text. Marcus helped me out of the SUV with surprising courtesy. "Welcome to Villa Santoro. This has been my family's seat for over 200 years. You'll be safe here while we sort out this mess." The older woman, his housekeeper, I guessed, descended the steps and immediately launched into a stream of Italian while examining Marcus from head to toe. Checking for injuries, from her gestures. He submitted to her inspection with the patience of someone who'd been through this routine many times, responding to her questions while she alternately scolded and fussed over him. "Maria essentially raised me after my mother died," Marcus explained when the woman paused for breath. "She's convinced I'm still 12 and incapable of taking care of myself." Maria turned her attention to me, her sharp eyes assessing. She said something in Italian that made Marcus laugh. "She wants to know if you're my girlfriend or another one of my complications." I told her you're the woman who saved my life and is now under my protection. She says that makes you family by the old rules, which means you're her responsibility too now. Before I could respond, Maria took my hands in hers, rough, warm hands that had clearly done decades of work, and said something else. She says welcome to our home, and she's sorry you've been dragged into our problems. Also, you're too thin, and she's going to fix that immediately. Despite everything, I felt tears prick my eyes. There was something about the genuine warmth in Maria's greeting, the normalcy of maternal fussing, that broke through my emotional numbness. "Thank you," I managed in Italian. "Grazie." Maria beamed and patted my cheek, then barked orders at the younger staff members who scrambled to grab my luggage. "I'll show you to your room," Marcus said. "Then we'll have dinner, and I'll explain everything I can about the situation and what happens next. I imagine you have more questions." "About 1,000. I'll answer what I can. Some things I can't share for your own safety. The less you know about certain aspects of our business, the better." He led me through the villa's interior, all marble floors and frescoed ceilings, antique furniture that probably belonged in museums, family portraits spanning generations. We climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, down a corridor lined with more art than I'd seen outside galleries, stopping at a door near the end. "This was my sister's room before she married and moved to Rome," Marcus said, opening the door. "It has its own bathroom, and the windows face the garden rather than the drive, so it's quiet. Make yourself comfortable. Maria will bring up some clothes if you need anything you didn't pack. Dinner is at 8, about 2 hours." The room was beautiful. High ceilings, a 4-poster bed with linens that probably cost more than my monthly rent, a writing desk by windows that overlooked terraced gardens. A doorway led to a bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in. I searched for words. "This is really nice. Thank you." Marcus lingered in the doorway. "Sarah, I know none of this is what you wanted or expected, but I give you my word, my personal word, that you'll be safe here. No one will harm you while you're under my protection. That's not an empty promise. It's a bond that carries weight in my world." "Why?" The question came out more desperate than I intended. "Why do you care so much? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything beyond maybe a thank you card for the rescue." He was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes distant. 3 years ago, my younger brother was in a car accident in Palermo. A student, just a girl, 19 years old, stopped and pulled him from the wreckage before it caught fire. Saved his life, stayed with him until the ambulance came, never asked for anything in return. 6 months later, she was killed in crossfire during a territorial dispute that had nothing to do with her. Wrong place, wrong time. She died because our world spills over onto innocent people, and we don't always contain the damage. He met my eyes directly. "I think about her sometimes, about how we couldn't protect her, even though she'd saved my brother. About how that debt went unpaid because we didn't know she needed protection until it was too late. I won't make that mistake twice. You saved my life yesterday, Sarah. That creates an obligation I take very seriously, and this time, I have the chance to fulfill it properly." The raw honesty in his voice made it impossible to doubt his sincerity. Whatever else Marcus Santoro might be, criminal, mafia boss, dangerous man, he meant what he said about protection and obligation. "Okay, I said quietly. I don't understand your world, and honestly, it terrifies me. But I believe you mean to keep me safe. So thank you for that. You're welcome. Now rest, clean up, and I'll see you at dinner. We'll talk more then. After he left, I stood in the center of the beautiful room and tried to process everything. 48 hours ago, I'd been a dive instructor on an extended working vacation, my biggest concerns involving tank pressure and tourist sunburns. Now I was in a Mafia Boss's ancestral villa, under protective custody, because I'd done the decent thing and pulled a drowning man from the sea. I sat on the edge of the enormous bed and finally let myself cry. Not dramatic sobbing, just quiet tears of stress and fear and overwhelming strangeness. Everything felt unreal, like I'd slipped through a crack between normal life and some movie plot that followed different rules. Eventually, I pulled myself together and took a shower that lasted 30 minutes, standing under water hot enough to turn my skin pink, washing away the stress and salt and confusion. The bathroom cabinets held expensive soaps and lotions, fluffy towels that felt like clouds, little luxuries that were probably everyday items here but felt absurdly decadent to someone who'd been living in a third-floor walk-up with intermittent hot water. When I emerged wrapped in a towel, I found my suitcase had been unpacked, my clothes hanging in the wardrobe, toiletries arranged on the bathroom counter, laptop charging on the desk. Professional, efficient, slightly eerie. I dressed in the nicest casual clothes I'd packed, dark jeans, a simple blouse, the leather sandals I'd bought at a Cephalou market. A knock on the door made me jump. Yes? Maria entered carrying a tray, bread, cheese, olives, sliced fruit, a glass of white wine. She set it on the desk and gestured for me to eat, then mimed that dinner would be later. Her kindness made my throat tight again. Grazie, I managed. Molto gentile. She smiled and patted my shoulder, said something I didn't understand, but that sounded sympathetic, and left me alone with enough food to feed 3 people. I nibbled at the bread and cheese, not really hungry but knowing I should eat. The wine helped, crisp and cold, probably from the estate's own vineyards. I thought about my sister in Seattle, wondered what she was doing right now, whether she'd tried to call my Sicilian number and gotten concerned when I didn't answer. I needed to contact her soon, before she started worrying and calling embassies. The windows showed the garden in evening light, shadows lengthening across manicured paths. Beautiful and peaceful, like a postcard. Only the guards I could now see patrolling the perimeter betrayed that this was anything other than a luxurious vacation rental. At 7:30, another knock. A young woman in staff uniform smiled shyly and gestured that she'd been sent to show me to dinner. I followed her back through the villa's corridors, this time noticing more details. Security cameras discreetly mounted in corners, heavy doors that probably reinforced with steel, the way certain rooms had better sightlines than others. The villa was beautiful, but it was also defensible, architecture that served double duty. We arrived at a dining room that looked like something from a Renaissance painting. Long tables set with crystal and silver, candles flickering in wall sconces, more family portraits watching from gilded frames. Marcus stood when I entered, joined by Domenico and 2 other men I hadn't met yet, both younger, both with the careful posture of people trained to violence. Sarah, please sit. Marcus gestured to a chair near his at the head of the table. Let me introduce you. You know Domenico, my second and oldest friend. This is Luca, who handles our security. The first young man nodded. And this is Antonio, my cousin and advisor. The second offered a warmer smile. Nice to meet you all, I said awkwardly. Sorry about the circumstances. The circumstances aren't your fault, Antonio said. His English was good, his accent less pronounced than Marcus's. You did a brave thing, saving Marcus. We're grateful, even if the aftermath has been complicated. Dinner was served by Maria and another woman, course after course of incredible food. Fresh seafood, homemade pasta, roasted vegetables from the estate's gardens. Wine that made the store-bought bottle I'd shattered yesterday taste like cleaning fluid. The men talked business in low voices, occasionally translating for my benefit when the conversation touched on topics I should know about. Gradually, I pieced together the situation. Marcus had been investigating irregularities in the family's shipping business, legitimate cargo ships that his family actually owned and operated. Someone had been skimming profits, cooking books, possibly using the ships to transport contraband without authorization. His investigation had gotten close to identifying the culprit when the sailing accident occurred. 3 people had access to my boat and knew I'd be sailing alone that afternoon. Marcus explained over dessert. My cousin Roberto, who manages our marina properties. My uncle Vittorio, who technically owns the sailboat through a shell company. And my father's former partner, Franco, who still has keys to family properties despite his semi-retirement. You suspect one of them? I suspect someone working with or for one of them. The actual sabotage, cutting the rudder cable, would have required technical knowledge and access. But the order to do it came from someone with enough authority to organize an assassination without immediate blowback. What happens when you find out who it was? The table went quiet. Finally, Domenico spoke. Justice by our standards, which is harsher than what the legal system would provide, but also more certain. I didn't ask for clarification, didn't want to know the specifics of mafia justice. How long do you think this will take? I asked instead. Marcus considered. A week, possibly 2. We're gathering evidence, watching our suspects, waiting for them to make a mistake. The fact that they think I'm dead actually helps. They'll be less careful, more likely to reveal themselves as they try to consolidate power in my absence. And then? Then I resurface, deal with the problem, and you go home. Simple, in theory. Complicated in execution. The first few days at Villa Santoro passed in a strange blur of enforced domesticity and underlying tension. I woke each morning to sunlight streaming through gauze curtains, birdsong from the gardens, and the distant sound of staff beginning their routines. Maria brought breakfast to my room. Fresh pastries, fruit, strong coffee, and hovered until I ate enough to satisfy her maternal concern. The food was incredible. The setting was beautiful. And I was absolutely a prisoner no matter how luxurious the accommodations. Marcus gave me free run of the villa and gardens, though always with at least one security guard shadowing my movements. Not obviously, but I learned to spot them. Luca by the fountain when I walked the garden paths. Antonio reading on the terrace when I explored the library. Unfamiliar faces maintaining a discreet but constant perimeter. Protection or surveillance, depending on perspective. I spent hours in the villa's library, a 2-story room lined with books in Italian, English, French, and languages I didn't recognize. Someone in the Santoro family had been a serious collector, and the eclectic selection ranged from ancient philosophy to modern thrillers. I lost myself in novels, trying to escape into fictional problems that felt blessedly simpler than my current reality. Marcus joined me for dinner each evening, sometimes alone, sometimes with Domenico or Antonio. The conversations were surprisingly normal. We discussed books, argued about American versus Italian approaches to coffee, traded stories about our lives before that day in the Mediterranean. He told me about growing up in this villa, about the pressure of being groomed to lead a criminal organization he'd never quite decided he wanted to run, about his year studying philosophy at Oxford where he'd been Marcus from Sicily, instead of Marcus Santoro, future boss. I told him about growing up in Portland, about dropping out of a PhD program in marine biology to become a dive instructor, about the relief of choosing a life I actually wanted instead of one everyone expected, about my sister who was a corporate lawyer and couldn't understand why I'd thrown away my academic career for a job that barely paid the bills. She thinks I'm wasting my potential, I said over wine one evening. But every time I take someone diving for their first time and watch them discover the underwater world, I feel like I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to do. Is that stupid? It's honest, Marcus replied. Most people never figure out what they're meant to do. The ones who do and actually pursue it despite external pressure. That takes courage. Coming from a man who inherited a criminal empire, that's an interesting perspective. He smiled, something I'd noticed he did more often after several glasses of wine. I never said I was courageous. I inherited an organization, certainly. But I'm still figuring out if this is what I'm meant to do or just what I'm good at. There's a difference. On the fourth night, he invited me to his study after dinner. The room was classic old-world luxury. Leather chairs, a massive desk, shelves of leather-bound books, and crucially, a computer setup that looked like it belonged in a tech company rather than a Renaissance villa. I promised you could contact your family, he said, gesturing to the desk. The internet connection here is secure, routed through several VPNs, and your traffic is encrypted. You can email your sister, video call if you want, whatever makes you comfortable. Just don't mention where you are specifically, and don't tell her about me or the family, for her safety as much as yours. I sat at the desk, hands trembling slightly. What do I tell her? That you had a personal situation come up, that you're staying with friends in Sicily for a few weeks, and you'll explain everything when you get home. Keep it vague but reassuring. Your sister doesn't need details that might put her in danger if someone tracks your communications. I pulled up my email, saw 17 increasingly worried messages from my sister ranging from, "Hope you're having fun," to, "Sarah, I'm about to call the State Department. Please respond." I typed carefully, "Hey, Emma, I'm so sorry for the radio silence. Long story, but I'm safe and staying with some local friends while I figure out some unexpected stuff. Everything is fine, I promise. I'll call you when I'm back in the States in a few weeks. Don't worry about me. Love you. S." Simple, vague, hopefully reassuring enough to prevent embassy involvement. I hit send and immediately felt both better and worse, connected to my real life, but also reminded of how far away that life currently was. "Thank you," I said to Marcus, "for letting me do that. I'm not your jailer, Sarah. I'm your protector. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the surreal nature of my situation. During the day, when I was reading in the library, or walking the gardens, or having surprisingly normal conversations with Marcus, it was easy to almost forget why I was here. But alone in the dark, reality reasserted itself. I was being held against my will by criminals, because I'd accidentally witnessed something that made me a liability to other criminals. Around midnight, I gave up on sleep and wandered to the windows. The gardens were beautiful in moonlight, shadows and silver, and the dark shapes of cypress trees. A figure moved along one of the paths. Marcus, I realized, walking alone with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man carrying the weight of several worlds. The next morning, Antonio found me in the library. Marcus asked if you'd join him in the East Garden. He's having coffee there, if you're interested. I found him sitting at a small iron table beneath a pergola heavy with wisteria. 2 cups of coffee waited, steam rising in the morning air. He looked tired. Dark circles under his eyes, his usual careful posture slightly slumped. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, sitting across from him. "Occupational hazard. When you're trying to identify which family member wants you dead, insomnia comes with the territory." He pushed one of the coffee cups toward me. "We've narrowed the suspects. My cousin Roberto was in Rome the day the boat was sabotaged. Security footage from his hotel, restaurant receipts, very thorough alibi. Franco has early-stage dementia, according to his doctor. He couldn't have orchestrated something this complex." "That leaves your uncle?" "That leaves Vittorio. My father's younger brother. Always ambitious. Always second best. He has motive, controlling the family business after I'm gone. He has means, access to the boat, connections to people who could do the actual sabotage. What I don't have yet is proof, just circumstances and suspicion. What happens when you have proof? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the morning light through the wisteria. I call a family council, present the evidence. Let the family decide his fate according to our traditions. It won't be gentle, but it will be just by our standards. Do you think he'll confess? If confronted correctly, yes. Vittorio has pride. He'll want credit for how close he came to succeeding, even knowing the price of that admission. I sipped my coffee. Perfect, as always, Maria's work. Can I ask you something personal? You've earned some personal questions, I think. Do you want this life? The power, the violence, the constant watching for knives in the dark? Or is it just what you're stuck with? He considered the question seriously. Both? Neither? I was raised for this. Groomed, educated, trained to lead from the time I could walk. But my brother's death 3 years ago, the one I mentioned, who was saved by that student, changed something. He was supposed to be untouchable. We're supposed to be able to protect family. When we couldn't, when he died from injuries that took months to kill him, I started questioning whether this power is real or just an illusion we maintain through violence and fear. But you stayed. I stayed because leaving would have meant civil war. Succession disputes in families like mine don't resolve peacefully. People die, not just the principals, but staff, associates, innocent bystanders. So I stayed, and I tried to make things less violent where I could, more legitimate where possible, more humane when I had the authority. Small changes, incremental improvements. It's not redemption, but it's something. The honesty in his voice made me see him differently. Not just the criminal boss or the dangerous man who disrupted my life, but someone genuinely struggling with inherited responsibility and genuine moral conflict. For what it's worth, I said, you don't seem like a monster. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said to me this week. He smiled slightly, though the week's been rough, so the bar is admittedly low. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching the garden wake up. It was almost peaceful, that moment, before Luca came running across the lawn with news that would change everything. Marcus! He called from yards away, not caring about decorum. We found something. You need to see this now. The tone in his voice sent ice through my veins. Marcus was on his feet immediately, all trace of contemplative philosophy replaced by cold focus. What is it? Security footage from the marina, the night before your accident. You need to see who was on your boat. We followed Luca back to the villa, Marcus moving with barely contained urgency. In his study, Domenico had pulled up grainy security footage on the large monitor. The timestamp showed 2 nights ago, around 3 a.m. There, Domenico pointed, coming from the parking area. A figure approached Marcus's sailboat, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged. Even in the poor quality footage, I recognized the build, the walk. Marcus's face went absolutely still, but I saw his hands clench into fists. That's not Vittorio, he said quietly. No, Domenico confirmed. That's your cousin Antonio. The room seemed to freeze. Marcus stared at the screen as Antonio, charming, friendly Antonio, who'd welcomed me to Villa Santoro and called me brave, disappeared below deck on the sailboat, emerging 20 minutes later and walking calmly back to the parking area. Antonio, Marcus repeated, the name barely audible. My father's sister's son, the one I trained personally, the one I trusted with security decisions. There's more, Luca said. Financial records we just broke into from his personal accounts. Large payments from Roberto over the past 6 months. They've been working together, Roberto providing money and alibis, Antonio doing the actual work. And Vittorio? Marcus asked. Likely innocent. We think they were trying to frame him with circumstantial evidence while they consolidated power behind the scenes. Marcus sat heavily in his desk chair, staring at the paused image of Antonio on the screen. The betrayal was written across his face, not anger yet, but something deeper and more painful. He ate dinner with us, Marcus said. He smiled at Sarah. He called her brave for saving me, all while knowing he'd tried to kill me 2 days earlier. What do we do? Domenico asked quietly. Marcus was silent for a full minute. When he spoke, his voice was controlled but carried an edge that made me shiver. We let him think we still suspect Vittorio. We continue the investigation publicly. And tonight, we'll have a private conversation with Antonio where he explains exactly why betraying family seemed like a good idea. He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not violence exactly, but the capacity for it. The reminder that underneath the philosophy and the coffee conversations, Marcus Santoro was still a man who operated in a world where betrayal meant death. Sarah, you should stay in your room tonight. What happens next isn't something you need to see or hear. Will you kill him? That depends on what he says and how the family council votes. But yes, probably. Family betrayal, attempted murder of a blood relative. That's not something we forgive. Can't forgive if we want the family to survive. It's not personal. It's structural. The calm way he said it terrified me more than anger would have. This was Marcus as I'd never seen him. Not the thoughtful man who discussed philosophy, but the mafia boss making decisions about life and death with the same consideration I'd give to choosing dinner. I went back to my room and stayed there all day, declining lunch, ignoring Maria's concerned knocking, just sitting by the window and trying not to think about what was happening elsewhere in the villa. The knock on my door came around 9 that evening. I'd been sitting in the dark for hours, watching the gardens fade from twilight to full night. Lights clicking on along the paths in precise intervals. I'd heard raised voices earlier, shouting in Italian, something that might have been pleading, then ominous silence. Now Marcus stood in my doorway, still wearing the clothes from this morning, but looking like he'd aged years in a single day. There was blood on his cuff, just a small spot, barely visible unless you were looking for it. Is he dead? I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. No, but he will be, after the family council tomorrow. He confessed everything. How Roberto promised him control of the northern territories. How they'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment. He tried to justify it. Said I was making the family weak with my reforms, that we needed stronger leadership. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking exhausted. He's 28 years old. I taught him to shoot, to negotiate, to read people. And he tried to murder me because he thought my version of leadership wasn't violent enough. I didn't know what to say. What comfort could I offer for betrayal this fundamental? The family council meets at noon tomorrow, Marcus continued. 20 senior members will hear the evidence and vote on his fate. It's a formality. The vote will be unanimous for execution. But we follow procedure even in matters like this. Especially in matters like this. And after, you go home. The threat to you dies with Antonio and Roberto. We picked Roberto up 2 hours ago. He'll face the council too. My enemies will be dealt with. You'll be safe, and you can return to your life in Portland or wherever you want to go. He said it like it was simple. Like I could just walk away from this and resume normal existence, teaching tourists to dive and eating bad takeout, and pretending none of this had happened. How am I supposed to just forget this? I asked. How do I go back to my regular life knowing that people were killed because I pulled you out of the water? Marcus crossed the room and sat in the chair near my window, far enough away not to crowd me, but close enough that I could see the genuine regret in his eyes. You don't forget, but you compartmentalize. You accept that the world contains violence and betrayal alongside beauty and kindness, and you choose which parts to let define you. Antonio and Roberto chose violence. They made decisions that led to consequences. You chose kindness. You saved a drowning stranger. Those are different choices with different moral weights. That's convenient philosophy for someone about to order executions. It is, he acknowledged. But it's also true. Sarah, I'm not asking you to condone what I do or how my world operates. I'm asking you to understand that you're not responsible for the consequences of other people's choices. You saved a life. Everything that followed came from decisions other people made, not you. I wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that simple division of responsibility. But sitting in that beautiful room in a villa where tomorrow men would be sentenced to death, the distinctions felt slipperier than he made them sound. What happens to their families? I asked. Roberto has a wife and 2 daughters. They'll be taken care of, provided for financially, protected from retaliation. Antonio was unmarried. His mother will grieve, but she'll be looked after. We don't punish families for individual betrayal unless they were complicit. At least there was that. Some boundary to the violence. Some line they wouldn't cross. I should let you rest, Marcus said, standing. Tomorrow will be a long day. The council meets at noon, but I'd like you to remain in this wing of the villa until it's finished. For your sake more than anything else. I don't want to see it anyway. Good. After it's done, we'll arrange your travel home. First-class flights, compensation for the disruption to your life, and my personal guarantee that you'll never be bothered about any of this again. You'll be able to put this behind you. He moved toward the door, then paused. Sarah, for what it's worth, these past few days, talking with you, having someone to have normal conversations with who isn't calculating angles or power plays, it's been a reminder of what life could be like. So thank you for that, even if the circumstances were terrible. After he left, I finally cried properly. Not the quiet tears from that first day, but full sobbing into the expensive pillows, grieving for the innocence I'd lost without quite realizing I still had it. I'd known intellectually that the world contained violence and organized crime, and people who killed without hesitation. But knowing abstractly and knowing personally, understanding that the kind man who discussed philosophy over coffee would tomorrow pass judgment that meant death, those were entirely different forms of knowledge. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke to morning light and Maria's gentle knock. She brought breakfast, but also something else. A simple black dress laid across a chair, with a note in Marcus's handwriting. In case you want to watch from the gallery. Your choice. The dress was appropriate for a funeral or an execution. I should have stayed in my room, should have hidden from the reality of what was about to happen, but some morbid part of me needed to understand completely what I'd gotten tangled up in, needed to see the full truth of Marcus Santoro's world, rather than just the curated version he'd shown me over coffee. So I dressed in the black dress that fit perfectly. Maria must have guessed my size. And at 11:30, I slipped out of my room and followed the sound of voices to a part of the villa I hadn't explored before. A gallery overlooked what must have been a formal council chamber. A large room with a long table, portraits of ancestors watching from the walls, 20 chairs occupied by serious-faced men and women ranging from their 30s to their 70s. Antonio and Roberto knelt in the center of the room, hands bound, guarded by Luca and 2 others I didn't recognize. Antonio looked defiant even now, chin raised, refusing to show fear. Roberto wept openly, apparently having less pride about his approaching death. Marcus entered last, dressed in a dark suit, moving with formal dignity to the head of the table. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to my hidden position in the gallery. This council is called to judge betrayal within our family. The charges are attempted murder of a family head and conspiracy to usurp power through violence. The evidence has been reviewed by each of you. Are there any questions before we hear from the accused? Silence. No questions. The evidence must have been damning. Antonio Santoro, Roberto Santoro, you have the right to speak before judgment is passed. Explain yourselves if you wish." Antonio spoke first, his voice steady. "I don't apologize for recognizing that you're making this family weak. Your reforms, your attempts to go legitimate, your refusal to use the fear that keeps us powerful. It's all making us vulnerable to other families, other organizations. I tried to solve a problem you created through your weakness. By murdering me. By replacing failed leadership. It's what's always been done when a boss can't protect the family's interests." Marcus's expression didn't change, but I saw his hands tighten on the table edge. "Roberto, your defense?" "I was greedy," Roberto said through tears. "Antonio promised me territories, money, power. I didn't think about loyalty or family or anything except what I could gain. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry." At least he had the decency to admit his motives. I thought bitterly. "The family will now vote," Marcus said. "All in favor of the traditional sentence for family betrayal, death by the wronged party's choice of method, indicate now." 20 hands rose. Unanimous, as Marcus had predicted. The sentence is death, to be carried out before sunset today. Antonio Santoro, as the primary conspirator, your execution will be handled by me personally. Roberto Santoro, Domenico will carry out your sentence. May God have mercy on your souls, because this family cannot. It was so formal, so ritual, like they were following a script written centuries ago. Antonio remained defiant even as guards pulled him to his feet. Roberto collapsed entirely, being dragged from the room still sobbing. I left before I could see more, ran back to my room and locked the door, breathing hard, trying not to vomit. I'd wanted to understand Marcus's world, and now I did. Understood that beneath the philosophy and the kindness was a capacity for cold judgment. Understood that his world had rules that included execution for betrayal. Understood that I could never truly reconcile the man who discussed purpose over wine with the man who just sentenced his cousin to death. Hours passed. I heard nothing from my room. No sounds that suggested violence was being carried out somewhere in the villa. Maybe they did it away from the main house. Maybe it was quiet and quick. I didn't want to know the details. Around 5 p.m, a knock. Marcus entered without waiting for my response, still wearing the dark suit, but having changed the shirt. No blood this time, at least not that I could see. "It's done," he said simply. "Both sentences carried out. The family is satisfied that justice was served, and you're free to go whenever you wish. Your flights are booked for tomorrow morning, Palermo to Rome to Portland. First-class open-ended return ticket if you ever want to come back to Sicily for vacation, though I'd understand if you never want to see this island again." I couldn't look at him. "You killed them." "I did," Antonio by my hand, as is traditional for the wronged boss. Quick, professional. He felt minimal pain. I'm not cruel even when carrying out sentences. "You say that like it matters. Like there's a meaningful difference between cruel murder and professional murder. To the person being executed, probably not. To their families, yes, they can take some comfort in knowing their loved ones didn't suffer unnecessarily. It's a small mercy, but in my world, we take those where we can find them." I finally looked at him. His expression was neutral, controlled, but I could see the cost in his eyes. Whatever he wasn't someone who found killing easy or enjoyable. That was something I supposed. "I'll take those flights," I said. "I want to go home." "Of course. Maria will make sure you have everything you need for the journey. And Sarah." He paused, seeming to struggle with words. "I wish we'd met under different circumstances. In another life, where I was just Marcus and you were just Sarah, we might have been friends, maybe more than friends. But in this life, with who we both are, and what we've both seen, I think the best thing I can do for you is let you go and make sure you're never touched by this world again. Will I be safe? Really safe? You have my word. The people who knew about you are dead. My family knows you're under permanent protection. Anyone who touches you answers to me. Your name will be on a list that every organization in Sicily and most of southern Italy respects. You're safer now than you were before you ever pulled me from that water. It was cold comfort, but it was something. Thank you for keeping your promise about protection. Whatever else happened, you did what you said you'd do. It's the least I owed you. The debt for saving my life can never be fully repaid, but I've done what I can. He left me alone after that. I spent my last night at Villa Santoro packing my things, eating the farewell dinner Maria prepared with tears in her eyes, accepting the envelope of cash Marcus left in my room. More money than I'd make in 6 months of diving instruction, compensation for the life he'd disrupted. The flight home was surreal. First class for the first time in my life, treated like royalty by flight attendants who had no idea why I looked shell-shocked and barely touched the expensive meal. I spent most of the journey staring out the window, watching Europe disappear behind clouds, trying to figure out how to return to normal life after everything I'd seen. My sister met me at PDX looking simultaneously relieved and furious. 2 weeks of cryptic emails, Sarah. I was about to fly to Sicily myself and start knocking on doors. I'm sorry, I said, and I was. Something complicated happened, but I'm fine. I promise I'm fine. She studied me with lawyer-sharp eyes that missed nothing. You look like you've seen some things. I have. I'll tell you about it eventually. Just not yet. Emma knew better than to push. She drove me home to my tiny Portland apartment, stayed long enough to make sure I was settled, then extracted a promise that I'd call if I needed anything. After she left, I stood in my living room, small, shabby, achingly familiar, and tried to feel like I'd actually come home. The next weeks were strange. I went back to my regular life, teaching diving in local quarries, picking up instructor shifts at the community college pool, eating cheap Thai food, and watching Netflix. On the surface, everything was the same. But I'd changed in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I found myself constantly aware of my surroundings now, noting exits and sightlines, cataloging faces that appeared too frequently to be coincidental. Once I'd have called it paranoia, but after Sicily, I recognized it as the awareness of someone who'd seen how quickly normal could become dangerous. I had nightmares sometimes. Not about violence I'd seen, but about violence implied. Dreams where I stood in galleries watching judgments passed, where I pulled drowning men from water who turned to look at me with dead eyes, where I ran through Sicilian villas searching for exits that didn't exist. 6 weeks after returning home, a letter arrived. Expensive paper, Italian postage, familiar handwriting. Sarah, I hope this finds you well and settling back into your life. I wanted you to know that the situation here has stabilized completely. The family is unified, the territories are secure, and there have been no further challenges to my leadership. You were right to be disturbed by what you witnessed. I'm disturbed by it too, even though I understand the necessity within the world I inhabit. I think about you sometimes. Wonder if you're teaching diving, if you've managed to put Sicily behind you. I hope you have. You deserve a life untouched by the complications of mine. But if you ever need anything, and I mean anything, the promise of protection remains. Your family by the old rules, which means something permanent in my world. Be well. Live the life you chose. M. I read it 3 times, then tucked it into a drawer. Part of me wanted to throw it away, sever all connection to that chapter of my life. But another part, the part that remembered coffee conversations and genuine moments between the violence, couldn't quite do it. 3 months later, I was teaching an advanced diving class when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Usually I ignored those, but something made me check. "This is Sarah Mitchell?" "It is." I didn't recognize the voice. Female, professional, slight Italian accent. "I'm calling on behalf of Marcus Santoro. There's no emergency, but he asked me to extend an invitation. He's purchased a property in Taormina, a diving school and residence combined. He'd like to offer you a position as head instructor and co-owner. Full autonomy over operations, generous salary, housing included. He wanted me to emphasize that this is a legitimate business opportunity with no connection to family activities, and that there's no pressure to accept. He simply thought you might want the option to return to Sicily under better circumstances." I stood there in my wetsuit, chlorine smell heavy in the air, students waiting in the pool, and tried to process what I was hearing. Why would he do that? He said you'd taught him that choosing the life you actually want takes courage, and he wanted to make it possible for you to keep choosing it in a place that might make you happy. His words, not mine. I should have said no immediately. Should have recognized this as maintaining connection to a world I'd barely escaped. But instead I heard myself say, "Can I think about it?" "Of course. I'll send details to this number. Take whatever time you need." The details arrived an hour later. Photographs of a beautiful property on Taormina's coast, a diving school with modern equipment, a 2-bedroom apartment with a terrace overlooking the sea. Financial projections that showed the business was already profitable. Legal documents proving I'd have actual ownership and control, not just a nominal title. It was everything I'd ever wanted professionally, offered by someone whose world I'd sworn to leave behind. I spent a week agonizing over the decision. Called Emma, who thought I was insane to even consider it. Called my former grad school advisor, who thought I was insane not to jump at the opportunity. Lay awake nights weighing the risks against the appeal of returning to a place I'd actually loved, before everything got complicated. In the end, it was remembering Marcus's words that decided it. "You chose kindness. You saved a drowning stranger. Don't let other people's choices define your life." I called the number. "I'll take it, but I have conditions." "Name them." "Complete operational independence. No family business conducted on the property or involving my staff. And if anything dangerous starts happening near me, I walk away with no questions asked." "All acceptable. When can you start?" "Give me a month to wrap things up here." 4 weeks later, I landed in Palermo with 2 suitcases and a mixture of terror and excitement. A driver met me at the airport, professional, courteous, no weapons visible, and drove me along the coast to Taormina. The diving school was even better than the photographs. Modern equipment, comfortable student facilities, a small boat for ocean excursions. The apartment above had been furnished simply but beautifully, the terrace offering views that made my Portland place look like a prison cell. Marcus wasn't there when I arrived. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter. "Welcome home. The business is yours to run as you see fit. I've arranged for Maria to check in weekly. She's excited to feed you properly again. I'll stop by in a few days once you're settled, if that's all right. No pressure, no obligations beyond building something good here. M." That first week was a blur of getting oriented, meeting the existing staff, 3 local instructors who seemed professional and had no apparent mafia connections, organizing equipment, planning the schedule for tourist season. It felt real, in a way my Portland work never quite had, like I was building something lasting rather than just paying bills. Marcus showed up on day 8, driving himself in a modest car, dressed casually enough that tourists probably mistook him for a local businessman. We had coffee on my terrace, carefully neutral conversation about the business and the property, and whether I had everything I needed. "Why did you really do this?" I finally asked. "The honest reason." He was quiet for a moment, watching the Mediterranean. "Because you reminded me that there are ways to live that don't involve constant calculation and violence. Because I wanted to create something good instead of just managing the various shades of bad in my regular life. And because I owed you a debt. and this seemed like a better way to repay it than just money and promises. This is more than repaying a debt. This is a gift. Call it what you want. Just build something good here. Teach people to dive. Show them the beautiful parts of Sicily. Create the life you actually want. That's payment enough. He finished his coffee and stood to leave. I won't intrude on your life here, Sarah. But if you need anything, you know how to reach me. And if you'd ever like to have dinner sometime, just as friends, nothing complicated, I'd enjoy that. Maybe, I said. Let me settle in first. Figure out how this new life works. Fair enough. He was halfway to his car when I called after him. Marcus? Thank you. Really. He smiled, the genuine one I'd seen occasionally at the villa, not the controlled public expression. You're welcome. And Sarah? It's good to have you back in Sicily. Over the following months, the diving school thrived. Word spread about the American instructor with the beautiful facility and professional operation. I taught tourists and locals, took groups to explore underwater caves and shipwrecks, fell in love with the work all over again without the pressure of barely scraping by financially. Marcus and I developed a careful friendship. He'd stop by every few weeks, always calling first, always respectful of boundaries. We'd have coffee or dinner, talk about books and philosophy, and the complicated nature of choosing how to live. He never brought business to the property, never involved me in anything connected to the family. The diving school remained completely separate from that world, exactly as I'd demanded. And slowly, very slowly, I began to trust that it was possible to exist in Marcus Santoro's orbit without being destroyed by it. It wasn't a romance. We both had too much history and too many complications for that simple narrative. But it was something real, a friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding of what it meant to try building good things in a world that often rewarded the opposite. One evening, about 6 months after I'd returned, we were sitting on my terrace watching the sunset when Marcus said quietly, I've been thinking about succession planning. Not because I'm worried about another Antonio situation, but because I've realized I don't want to do this forever. The family business, all of it. What would you do instead? I don't know yet. Something legitimate, something that helps more than it hurts. Maybe something with boats, since that's what almost killed me and what brought me to you. He smiled slightly. The universe has a sense of irony. You could always learn to dive, I suggested. I'm an excellent instructor. Is that an offer? Maybe, if you promise not to have anyone sabotage my equipment. He laughed, genuine, surprised laughter that transformed his face. I promise. No sabotage, no complications, just a student learning from a good teacher. And somehow, impossibly, that's what happened. Marcus learned to dive over the next several months, showing up for lessons like any other student, following my instructions, discovering the underwater world with the same wonder I'd seen in countless clients before him. It was normal in the best way. A piece of ordinary life we carved out together despite everything else. 2 years after I'd pulled him from the Mediterranean, Marcus officially stepped back from leading the family, installing a council of trustees to manage things collectively. He didn't abandon the family completely. That wasn't possible. But he created enough distance to build a different kind of life. He bought a house in Taormina, not far from the diving school. Started a legitimate maritime business. Learned to live with slightly less power and significantly more peace. We grew closer, carefully navigating the space between friendship and something deeper, both aware of how unlikely and impossible this situation would seem to outside observers. Do you ever regret it? I asked him one evening, both of us sitting on his terrace, wine glasses in hand, the sea dark and calm below. Regret what specifically? My list of potential regrets is extensive. Pulling back from the family, choosing a quieter life, all of it. He considered the question seriously, as he always did. No, or rather, I regret the years I didn't do it sooner. I regret that it took someone trying to kill me to make me examine whether I wanted the life I was living. But the actual choice? No regret at all. This life, this version where I run a shipping company and take diving lessons and have dinner with a woman who tolerates my complicated history. This is better. Quieter. Less powerful. Infinitely better. Even knowing you could have had more power, more control. Power's overrated when you spend all your time watching for betrayal. Control is an illusion when you're constantly one conspiracy away from assassination. This, he gestured to the peaceful evening, the ordinary moment. This is real in a way that other life never was. I thought about my own journey, the PhD I'd abandoned, the conventional path I'd rejected, the strange route that led from Portland to Sicily via a Mafia Boss's near drowning. None of it made sense on paper, but somehow it had brought me to exactly where I needed to be. We're both pretty weird, I said. You know that, right? This whole situation is insane by normal standards. Completely insane, Marcus agreed cheerfully. But we've established that normal is overrated. I think we're allowed to build something good out of strange circumstances. And we did. Not a fairy tale ending. Those don't exist in real life. But something honest and hard-won and surprisingly functional. I ran my diving school. Marcus built his legitimate business. We navigated the complications of his past, and my wariness, and the fact that everyone around us probably thought we were both crazy. But on warm Sicilian evenings, sitting on terraces overlooking the Mediterranean, teaching tourists to appreciate the underwater world, having dinner with someone who understood both choosing your own path and living with complicated history, it felt like exactly the life I'd wanted, just arrived at through the strangest possible route. You know what the truly insane part is? I said to Marcus one evening. What's that? I'd do it again. If I saw someone drowning, I'd still jump in and pull them out, even knowing everything that followed. The danger, the complications, all of it. He smiled and raised his wine glass. To dangerously decent people who make inconvenient choices. To finding our way to strange but good lives, I countered. We clinked glasses and watched the sunset paint the Mediterranean gold and crimson, two unlikely people who'd built something real from one moment of kindness and all its chaotic consequences. It wasn't the ending I'd expected when I pulled a drowning stranger from the water. But somehow, impossibly, it was exactly where I needed to be.